Happy Friday, everybody. Happy follow-up to Passover, Easter, spring break, wherever we are. Thanks for joining. Jameson Spivack is with me, one of the leads of our AI team. And interesting to think as to whether this data-driven pricing that we're going to talk about is an AI issue or just sort of a old-time marketing issue. Clearly a bit of the notion that maybe algorithms are updating prices real time in some way that is concerning to consumers or policymakers, is driving a lot of the activity in this area. There are, is it 40 or 50, Jameson will tell us, bills proposed, a couple that have passed. We'll get into it. But let's start with noting that Jameson and colleagues just put out a great report that we will post that you should take a look at, because it really helps unpack this somewhat complicated issue of surveillance pricing, of data-driven pricing, of personalized pricing, or something that many marketers and advertisers have done for a very long time and will tell us they're doing to give people discounts and encourage people to shop, and it's really only good for you. But clearly some policymakers and others are not convinced. So Jameson, jump in. Big picture of the top lines in the report, and maybe a good way to sort of start is what are we even talking about here when we use this bucket of words?
Yeah, thanks, Jules. So surveillance pricing or algorithmic pricing, or whatever other term people want to use, is actually referring to a range of distinct but overlapping pricing practices that rely on machine learning algorithms and or data, whether that's market data, that's personal data, other kinds of data, to inform the prices that are offered to consumers. So each strategy works a little bit differently. It implicates unique policy considerations. But generally speaking, the conversation has centered around whether the use of sophisticated algorithms to adjust prices in real time or near real time based on consumers' personal data is helping consumers by lowering prices, or whether it's actually being used to take advantage of them in an invasive way. So the most common pricing practices that people talk about include dynamic pricing, in which prices are adjusted rapidly in response to changing conditions. That could be market conditions, that could be other things. Algorithmic pricing, which just involves the use of an automated system to set prices based on an analysis of input data. And then personalized or surveillance pricing, in which prices vary by consumer or across market segments based on personal data. And for this report, in our other work, we use the term data-driven pricing to kind of refer to all of these different practices as a general term. So this report that we put out does three things. One, it explores how retailers are using a range of data types, including personal data, to inform the prices that they offer. Two, it contextualizes these pricing techniques in existing US law, whether that's privacy law, whether that's competition law, whether that's some emerging laws specific to algorithmic pricing or personalized pricing. Also looking at enforcement activity and legislation. And then most critically, this report also provides a number of practical recommendations for how retailers can ensure their use of data and or algorithms in pricing is fair. And these were developed in consultation with industry leaders.
Well, so let's start with that definition, because I think that's the challenging part. Obviously, a broad definition in legislation here could sweep in a wide range of practices, discounts to new customers, or maybe enticements to customers who are not regularly engaging, and so maybe they're going to be offered a better deal. How nuanced are policymakers being in not over defining the term to capture a lot of the marketing practices that I think are good for competition or that people like, while maybe trying to narrow the ones that seem a little bit more, I don't know, you called it sort of the real-time somehow, I don't know, you are lingering longer on a page, and then maybe you're going to get a discount versus someone else who doesn't. And again, there might be some good reasons to do that. You look like you're leaving. Oh, let me try to give you another offer to get you to stay. But how are the definitions being crafted, and are they capturing a wide range of other services? New York, I think we were talking before we went live, is one of the states that has passed the law, and we're seeing this price has been set by an algorithm, the transparency that is required by that law, in a wide range of places, sometimes a bit confusing, where it doesn't seem like there's been some, unusual type of setting, but rather pricing that may be determined by an algorithm because of a wide range of factors.
Yeah, and it's really tricky to draw those lines, and lawmakers are trying to strike that balance between prohibiting, the more clearly harmful scenarios like price gouging or what feels unfair or exploitative, while also not preventing some of the things you mentioned, or loyalty programs, personalized discounts, other things that consumers generally enjoy. So far in 2026, there have been over 70 bills addressing different kinds of data-driven pricing strategies. And this is up from last year overall, there was over 60. And so the definitions vary between these different bills. Last year there was a significant focus on data-driven pricing practices, specifically in the context of housing or food retail, reflecting concerns about potentially harmful pricing practices in these essential markets. These are still a priority for lawmakers this year, but a greater proportion of bills are addressing pricing in retail more generally, reflecting concerns about these practices across the board. And so at the same time, there's also a growing, increasing complexity in the exceptions that lawmakers will include in these bills. So they will also include exceptions for loyalty programs, for highly regulated industries like finance or banking or insurance, for price differentials that can be explained by cost differences in different areas, even for widely understood social categories like seniors and military personnel and students, which to me, I don't know necessarily how you draw that line between those broadly and widely understood social categories and others, but it's something that lawmakers are putting in the bills in recognition that if they prohibit surveillance pricing writ large, some of these, maybe common marketing practices, maybe appreciated marketing practices, they won't be able to offer them. But it's tricky to draw those lines, and there's no consensus. That's one issue that lawmakers are encountering, is that there hasn't been agreement about which practices are fair, which should be off limits, something in the middle between just allowing everything and completely prohibiting the use of personal data.
As I think about it, it seems like the challenge is that there's not a clear, bright line between hey, I want to get more of these customers to engage, and they might not, so I'll give them a discount, and a whole range of marketing practices that try to figure out how to set prices to get you to buy, which seems kind of that's the way business works in a reasonable way, and then putting on a different framing and saying, what's the maximum yield I can get that this particular user, or even this particular collection of people who have this particular set of characteristics, what's the maximum I could get to be the most, profitable, based on my business practices. And it sort of, well, maybe I don't need to give somebody a big discount and someone else I need to give a big discount. Feels like there's there's an extreme there that seems fine. I gotta, you might not renew. You called up and you want to cancel. I'm gonna, give you an offer, or you're coming to the website and I know you're at risk, so I might give you some sort of offer where we can sort of see the reason, and then sort of this almost same thing, but at the extreme of, well, what's the maximum I can get? So is it that it's per each individual, that each individual person gets something different? Or is it that there's just like a narrow class of people who look like X, Y, and Z, and somehow I think they would pay more than the norm, so I try to charge all those people more, and it well, in the end, I guess that's why they are falling back on the transparency as sort of a way to move forward.
Right. And so many companies are adamant that they will only use data-driven pricing practices to lower prices for certain consumers compared to a baseline price. But a lot of consumer advocates are worried about the possibility that certain retailers might use personal data to infer an individual customer's willingness to pay. As you said, that's the term in the literature, potentially in ways that feel exploitative. Some people might argue that it's actually more equitable to charge based on willingness to pay because it broadens the pool of customers who are able to afford a product to include those who might not have been able to afford it at the baseline price, whereas those who are able to pay more will. Meanwhile, others will argue that this may sound good on paper, but in practice, it just ends up taking advantage of people in desperate situations who might be more willing to pay for something because it's necessary. Or that even if it did end up being more equitable in practice, it would still be unfair to charge people more based on an inference about their wealth, or in some cases, actual knowledge about their wealth. But ultimately, this is a policy question. It goes beyond a simple cost-benefit analysis of how these practices impact how much people actually pay. It really gets to the question of what do we think as a society is fair in commerce? What feels exploitative or creepy to people? And as I said, there's not really a consensus on these questions right now, so there's a lot of work to be done on it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in different worlds, we recognize that merchants might update prices, but on the other hand, the fact that they have to publish, at least in the fixed world, or even previously in the online world, they have to publish sort of a set norm, gives us some sort of baseline. But in a world where I'm showing up and things maybe are generated dynamically, or we can, do we want that sort of world where the maximum economic efficiency or even the maximum social fairness, right? Because I might not be on the side that that's happy. I might be a wealthy but parsimonious person, and so does that mean like everybody should be trying to get the maximum nickels and dimes, out of me? I may not care that that at the end of the day I pay more, but that's because I earn more, or someone else has more time to sort of fiddle and fuss. It's probably not equitable that we have, in some ways, senior discounts when many seniors are quite, more affluent than other audiences. But on the other hand, maybe have more time or are ready to eat at a different hour. And we obviously have societal acceptance that we're going to let people cater to a senior audience. And we don't worry, well, correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't worried that much as to whether, well, now I'm offering all people of one race or one geography a better deal than elsewhere. We're saying, yeah, the seniors deserve a break, right, as a class.
Right, and that's a policy question that we have decided, we have answered in a particular way, and it's something that critically consumers understand and expect. It's become a norm. We get it. We know it. We a lot of people think it's a pretty good thing. So one of the things that we recommended in the report, and that is required in New York's transparency law, is greater transparency about how data informs pricing, how personal data may be used to inform individualized offers. I think that the New York personalized algorithmic transparency law, it's only about disclosing that an algorithm was used to set prices based on personal data. It doesn't give any information about exactly how that works. But I think that there is a little bit more room for retailers to be more transparent about that. Obviously modern pricing is incredibly complex and there's so many factors that go into it and it changes by customer over time. And so providing these really dynamic pricing decision information, for each product is logistically challenging and probably impossible. But I think that there are things that retailers can do to more proactively demonstrate to consumers that the pricing practices are actually benefiting them. They are getting a personalized discount because they haven't shopped at a place in a while and the company wants to try to bring them back. And I think that retailers rather, need to do probably a better job of explaining that to the consumers so that they don't just assume the worst.
What are some of the other laws proposing as ways to draw the line beyond the transparency?
So there's kind of 4 models currently in legislation. One is disclosure requirements in line with New York's Algorithmic Pricing Disclosure Act, which focuses on providing notice about the use of personalized algorithmic pricing. Most of these bills are generally aligned with that. New York is rather prescriptive. It's very specific language that they must use when disclosing that they are using an algorithm to set prices using personal data. Others are less prescriptive about what the language might be, but they're still disclosure based. One of the more common types of bills are just a general prohibition on surveillance pricing, defined differently depending on the bill, but generally referring to the use of personal data to set prices. A lot of these bills contain exceptions. As I mentioned before, these exceptions are getting increasingly sophisticated in recognition that, we might accidentally scope out all these practices that we don't want to. But there are no current laws that take this approach. Another approach is to focus on surveillance pricing in food retail specifically. And then another approach is to prohibit algorithmic collusion in housing. And there's a long tail of other bills that focus on different things, but those are the main models that lawmakers have used.
In our report, you mentioned that we proposed some degree of transparency and so forth, but there were a couple of other key proposals. Can you share some of the other pieces of advice that the report suggests?
Yeah, so a lot of these recommendations are in line with existing data governance, AI governance approaches. So one of them is to map and track the collection and use of all the data that informs consumer pricing, including data sources and data provenance. So that's engaging in tracking data provenance, developing data maps to understand the source, the lineage of personal data that they have, how each individual type of data is being used to inform pricing. And this aligns with a lot of companies' existing data governance frameworks. It aligns with NIST's AI risk management framework, the ISO standard on AI management systems, things like that. The report also recommends to test all data sets and pricing algorithms for unintended bias. This generally, on protected characteristics like race and gender. This is, to ensure that, as you mentioned before, certain groups, particularly protected groups, are not being discriminated against intentionally or unintentionally. One group of people getting higher prices or lower prices based on a protected characteristic. One issue with this is that in many cases, retailers will use a third-party pricing algorithm. They might use first-party data, they might use third-party data, but they also might use a third-party pricing algorithm. And so in those cases, it's important that retailers are aligned with the pricing algorithm vendors on data use policies. And there's a number of other recommendations in the report that you can read further, but also happy to talk about those more.
Yeah, so one obviously huge, big takeaway is there are real areas where there is clear discrimination law, and if you're dealing with any of those categories, onus is clear that you maybe legally or you at least morally may want to be on the hook to make sure that somehow you're not really creating some significant challenges in terms of housing and employment. But also, it's increasingly easy for external critics to test and assess and figure out what you're doing, and then perhaps accuse you of doing something that sounds quite unfair. And if you are indeed making decisions that might be treating different people differently, you kind of want to be able to say, well, yes, that's why we think that that makes sense, or and sort of stand behind it. Yes, we're giving our best customers offers, or oh no, it's true that some people who are not our best customers are getting great offers, but that's because that's how we want to turn them into good customers. And being surprised and unaware that people are going to be doing their homework given the priority of this issue, and how much it may tie to sort of the affordability politics that are clearly part of the election cycle. Lots of reasons why reporter, media, consumer advocates might want to be looking into this sort of thing and pressing back. And so, do your homework. Take a look at whether or not you are creating some disparities, and whether you have a real defensible reason that you're doing so.
That's right, and even beyond just disparate treatment or disparate impact or bias, it's important that retailers have really clear internal policies around what data types are allowed, what uses of data are allowed when informing pricing decisions, and they should set these policies based on an analysis of fairness, of the specific context, and consumer expectations. They should be informed by retailers' data protection impact assessments or their privacy assessments. And they should be looking at regulatory guidance, emerging enforcement activities, studies of consumer sentiment to serve as a helpful guidepost when they're making these decisions. So in the case that they're being investigated, or whether it's by journalists, whether it's by an enforcement agency, they can point to these policies and be able to explain them and show why they are fair and legitimate.
Yeah, look, I mean, legitimate marketing is always the right thing to do, and always going to be on the radar of attorneys general and local consumer regulators at a time when inflation is still around, and when prices are popping now, gas and supermarkets, and the consumer concern about these issues is high. We can certainly tell you that it's very high on the radar of regulators. That's why you see so many of these bills. And so people in the data protection side who may not typically have seen this as their core issue, because it's not necessarily about new kinds of data being collected, or even new uses. It's sort of a expanded version that they might have seen as maybe just a consumer protection issue and not a data protection issue. But these things really have reconverged in the way they were in the early days, when we didn't have a lot of data protection law. We had only consumer protection law, and we were using it to spin out data protection. So if this is on your plate, you really want to make sure that you or your counterparts in the broader marketing side of the organization are collaborating to do some of the due diligence here.
But yeah, that's exactly right. And in January, California AG Rob Bonta announced an investigative sweep of businesses in the retail, grocery, and hotel sectors to determine if they are engaging in surveillance pricing and using consumer data to set targeted prices, which according to AG Bonta may constitute a violation of CCPA's purpose limitation principle, if the use of consumer data for pricing is not consistent with their reasonable expectations. So definitely something to pay attention to in California and beyond.
Yeah, important point. A lot of the state laws that have more restrictive terms in it perhaps give an extra element of legal support to the traditional disclosure and unfairness concepts. Folks, please take a look at the report. It's a great read. Kudos, Jameson, really a nuanced issue that clearly is still an open matter of debate and thinking. And thank you for flagging a bit of a roadmap to both understand the issue that I think will be helpful for policymakers and for companies and civil society. And wishing folks a good weekend. See you all soon.
Thanks. Bye.